June 24, 2022, a day that changed history for protecting unborn children and their mothers. But where do we go from here? Welcome to Freedom Alive. We joyously celebrated the moment when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the horrible Roe and Casey abortion decisions. And we are so very grateful to God. But the work has just begun. The battle continues on so many levels. I'm so thankful to be here, joined again by co-host Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, you entered the arena to fight for the sanctity of human life when you started Liberty Counsel in 1989.
Well, it certainly did, and abortion was a big issue in changing my trajectory from the pastoral pulpit ministry to going into law school. It was when I was a pastor, I watched a documentary called Assignment Life that was shocking to me because I did not know what was going on with regards to abortion other than what I read in the media, and I saw the reality of it on this documentary that included a real first trimester suction tube abortion where they reassemble the body parts, which they have to do to make sure all the parts of the body are out of the womb so that you don't have infection that sets in later. And that was very shocking, but that naturally brings together the intersection of our faith and how does our faith deal with law, the Supreme Court, and policy, state law or federal legislation as well. And so that intersection is right there in the context of abortion. But when we started Liberty Counsel in 1989, one of our goals, a top agenda goal, was to overturn Roe versus Wade. Our first public banquet was with Pat Williams as the keynote speaker of the Orlando Magic at the time, general manager. And it was focused on the issue of the sanctity of human life. So this is a historic moment. But as you said, Steve, the battle really now has shifted from the federal level and the U.S. Supreme Court to the states. And that battle is very, very intense, both on the legislative level as well as in the state courts. But also now we're starting to see this with the FDA and chemical abortions and other kinds of ways that are now rolling out to assault human life. So our work has really intensified.
I agree. So often we use the term or the phrase life or death battle, and it's really not true. In this particular case, it's unbelievably, literally true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we are so thankful to be joined today by Liberty Counsel's Holly Meade, who's going to give you an update on all of the developments. There are so many pieces to this, so many things that are happening in so many ways for you to get involved at home. Our Freedom Alert is next.
Some pharmacies will now provide abortion pills. I'm Matt Staver, co-host of Freedom Alive. The FDA finalized a rule change that will allow retail pharmacies to offer abortion pills in the United States. Mifepristone blocks a necessary hormone for the pregnancy and slowly starves the baby. This drug is taken with misoprostol, which causes severe cramping, contractions, and bleeding to expel the baby from the womb. Under the new FDA rule, pharmacies can apply for a certification to distribute mifepristone. If granted, the pharmacy can dispense the pill directly to patients upon receiving a prescription from a certified prescriber. It's a tragedy that the FDA is making it even more convenient to kill babies by simply taking pills. This federal agency should not be using taxpayer dollars to encourage women to commit human genocide.
Up next, Matt's interview with Holly Meade.
On June 24, 2022, an historic event happened at the United States Supreme Court, one that we have been working towards for decades, and that is in the Dobbs decision. The Supreme Court, in a masterfully written opinion, overruled the unconstitutional Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey abortion decisions, a historic battle that had been in the works for decades with some wins and some losses, and then this historic win, June 24, 2022. But joining me now to talk about where this battle continues now that that historic event happened is Holly Meade with Liberty Counsel. Now, Holly, it's a historic day to celebrate.
Absolutely.
It'll go down in history.
You know, it's really a privilege too, Matt, to be a part of that. I mean, we worked really hard on that amicus brief. We showed the court that abortion has been historically racist because they primarily target African American, Hispanics. Most of your abortion centers are in those neighborhoods. So it's very clear, and of course with Margaret Sanger and the beginning of Planned Parenthood, she was very clear to what to target those people she considered undesirable.
Yeah, in fact, our amicus brief was cited in the United States Supreme Court's opinion, and there were about 200 plus amicus briefs that were submitted from both sides arguing for or against these upholding or overruling of Roe versus Wade. And ours was one of a small handful that was actually cited in the Supreme Court decision. We represented the Frederick Douglass Foundation and also the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference.
Right, so that's hundreds of thousands of Hispanic and African American churches and individuals.
Yeah, tens of millions of people. And the whole point was exactly to your point, and that is that Margaret Sanger from the very beginning wanted to eliminate certain populations. And she did this, first of all, through birth control. Well, she did it through sterilization, then birth control, and then eventually abortion to eliminate, in her words, certain populations that were undesirable. And one of them that she targeted was the Black population.
Right.
And obviously the brown population, and consequently also others that were lower mental IQ, physically challenged individuals, certain people that had different ethnicities and races that were not part of a super white race from Northern European type of descent. That's really what she was focused on. Same thing as Hitler.
Right.
And we asked the Supreme Court to close the door to that racist eugenic history and overturn Roe versus Wade. Thank God that that, in fact, is what happened.
You know, it was a glorious day. Of course, there was a leak beforehand, so we had a hint that was going to be the case. But then when the decision actually came out in June, we really celebrated, because I know that when you and Anita started Liberty Counsel in 1989, you went right out of the chute in the defense of unborn life and their mothers.
That's
as well.
right. That's right. And so we've been working on that for decades, since 1989, and others worked on it before that as well, all the way from the beginning of 1973.
And you know, it's interesting because, Matt, you used to be a pastor and you thought abortion was okay.
Well, I thought that if you were to ask me back then whether abortion was the taking of a human life, I would have said no, because I would have just parroted what happened in the media, what I read in the media, and I did not think it was.
And I think a lot of us were in that same boat.
Taking a human life. And so I probably would have said it's okay. I would not have had a strong feeling about it. The reason is because I bought the media narrative that it was maybe just a concentrated high menstrual cycle, and there was no human being involved.
Just a clump of cells,
group of cells, you know, had heavy blood flow or something of that nature. Never in my mind would I imagine what I saw in the documentary Assignment Life, that what you're really looking at is a small miniature human being that has the legs and arms and fingers and toes and the rib cage and everything, even in those first several weeks of pregnancy. By the time you realize that your menstrual cycle has been missed and you find out that you're pregnant, that little baby already has an amazing formation. It's just a small human being, but it has all of those parts that you and I have as you see it disseminated and ripped apart and then reassembled on the abortionist table. That's what was shocking to me, that this is what was happening in my community.
I know, but you think, Matt, when you look at, there's actually a video you can find when at the moment of conception, you see the light that is created. You see every part of God's being put into that conception of that child.
Yeah, you actually have a